Hi everyone, welcome to the health tip this week. So this week we're going to have a special interview, and I'm going to be interviewing the holistic nutritionist of the office, but we're going to be talking about a specific topic. Mary actually has a son that had autism, and she's going to go through her story and what happened, how she discovered it, and things like that. So I'm going to ask her a few questions, and we're going to dig into the topic a little bit. So first, hi Mary, welcome to the interview.
Thank you very much, Dr. Marco, for inviting me to actually give me a platform to talk.
Yeah. Okay. So the first question I had is before you had your son, just in general, what did you
Mhm.
know about autism before he was even born, like in general?
You know what, to tell you the truth, I didn't know anything. My first child is actually my daughter,
Hmm.
and my daughter was normal, correct? So I didn't, and so when my son was born, I didn't even know he had autism. So the only thing I knew is when he was born, I noticed a few things. One was he used to get frustrated very quickly,
Yeah.
and he used to cry a lot. So we used to actually call him a cry baby because we just
Hmm.
thought that he likes to cry. And as he started growing up, I noticed a few more things is that he was much more delayed when it comes to milestones. Like my daughter sort of learned how to walk faster, learned how to talk faster. And the other thing I noticed is when I would sit down to teach him to study, he wasn't able to grasp as fast as my daughter did. And I just thought that maybe he's a boy, maybe he takes a little longer. That's how I looked at it. But
Hmm.
then it was once he started to go to school is when I started to notice how he was finding it challenging studying.
Right. So had you heard the word autism before? You probably heard it in passing, I presume, before he was born.
I had. So actually, it was not when he was born, but actually much when he was maybe around 4 or 5 years old.
Yeah.
I had a colleague, and my colleague actually had a son with autism, and she used to give me a ride back home.
Hmm.
So every time when she gave me a ride, we would talk, and she would share with me the challenges that her son was experiencing. And
Right.
so that was the first time I'd ever heard about autism and
Okay.
like what are the kind of symptoms an autistic child has.
Okay, interesting. So let's go over the age range then. So was your son sort of seemingly developing normally? Did he do any of the milestones, or was he not crawling properly? Because these are all things that I look for when I'm looking at the neurology. Like sometimes they crawl in a funny way, or they don't crawl at all, or they just skip a milestone. They just start standing, but they never crawled, and that can influence how the brain develops. So what kind of things did you
Mhm.
notice?
Definitely, as I said, is that a lot of crying. And then crawling, yeah, now that you mentioned crawling, he actually had a very weird way of crawling. So, you know how you normally would be on your knees and you would crawl? He never actually crawled that way. So the way he crawled was he would actually, you know how you do a plank, but like a plank with your hands straight?
Yeah, yeah,
That's how he would walk. And actually, he would go backwards instead of forwards. So
yeah.
we would find it very odd, but we just thought that that was his way of sort of,
Okay.
crawling, but it was not the normal crawling that you would see with a normal child.
Right.
And then, as I said, is with regards to his milestones, he took longer to talk. We were actually at one point in time really worried because he was almost like I would say 2 years old,
Yeah.
and or maybe even later, and he was talking a lot of gibberish, but
Mhm.
like really not stringing in proper words. And then even things like you would call him and he may not respond to you, kind of
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
And then definitely uh, he took longer to be potty trained, took longer to even walk. Like I remember on his first birthday, when it was his first birthday, that is when he actually stood up and walked a few steps. So prior to that, he was only crawling, but trying to stand up. And then sort of would walk around holding the wall or something, but couldn't walk on his own. And then definitely with regards to studying, he took much longer even to write his name, and he had horrible handwriting. He
Writing.
could like when he wrote, you just couldn't understand what he was writing. So
Yeah.
like his fine motor skills were like really bad.
Yeah, yeah, very, very common. And there's something called stereotypies or stimming. Did you notice him doing
Mhm.
any kind of repetitive behavior?
No, I didn't notice that from him. And in fact, his behavior also was very interesting because when he was younger, he was very sociable. So he would
Oh,
go to the park. He loved to play with the children. He would ride the bike. He had actually made some friends in the park. But later on, and this was again, that's where my son was actually diagnosed much later on. He was diagnosed when he was 10 years old.
Yeah.
So it was only around like 8 or 9 years old that I started to noticing that he didn't like to go out. He didn't like to go to the park. He stopped like going to the park and he would just say, no, I don't want to go to the park. I'll play in my front yard.
Yeah.
And then he also started to behave like, he would see people and then he would run and hide in the garage because he didn't want to see people. So that's where I was a little confused because when he was younger, he was very sociable. He would go and talk to people. So all of a sudden, you see these changes, and I was confused. And then the other thing was he actually has dual diagnosis. So he was actually first diagnosed for learning disability because of all the challenges that he was experiencing at school.
Sure.
So when I took him to a psychologist, she actually diagnosed him for learning disability and short-term memory issues. So those were the diagnoses that he initially had when he was maybe around in grade 3. And so that's what we worked with
Gotcha.
till the time I started noticing these behaviors. And that's when I again went back to the psychologist to have a conversation to figure out what are these behaviors now.
Okay, interesting. So now that you know about like gut issues and stuff, a lot of times the crying, the persistent crying could have, do you think it possibly could have been a gut issue? Like, did you notice that he was bloated or did you realize any of that back then or maybe like irregular stools or anything like that?
So when he was younger, he wasn't bloated, but I know he had this tendency, he never chewed his food. So you would put something in the mouth and it would
So,
maybe 2 or 3 times he'll chew and then he'll just swallow. So he had a lot of times he would actually throw up because something would get stuck because he was not chewing. And then later on, when he was older, definitely a lot of like burping, a lot of like bloating. I think sometimes even constipated because I remember he used to go to the washroom and he would have a very difficult time sort of, passing bowel. So yes, he did have gut issues, but that was like later on. Earlier on I guess earlier on, he was eating a much nutritious diet, so it didn't have an issue. But later on, he started to go more towards like he wants to eat chips, he wants to eat
uh,
like, burgers, fries, those kind of things.
yeah.
And that's when I noticed that he was having those what do you say, gut issues. And you can see I'm a normal mom. I went through all the things
All those things.
that we should be doing
Yeah, yeah,
prior
absolutely.
to being a nutritionist. Yeah.
Cool. That's cool. Okay. So we're gonna make that part one of the interview. So in the next part, next week, I'm gonna be asking you about, okay, when you found out that's what it was, what were the steps you took? Because right now, if somebody saw your kid, because I saw him for the first time a little while ago, nobody would know
Mhm.
anything, right? So
Mhm.
we're gonna go over like what you did, the steps you took, and those kind of things, and that'll be next week's interview. So look forward to that next week. So that's it for this week.